All right, so thank you, Megan. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. So like Megan said, my name's Steve Mang. I'm an assistant professor of teaching in the chemistry department. And when the pandemic began, I was scheduled to teach a laboratory class, which did not happen because we couldn't really effectively deliver the lab. So we pushed it off. And during the summer and then in the fall, I got a chance to figure out with a couple of TAs how to replace the laboratory component of the class with something that could at least approximate the same thing. And so humanities people, don't tune out. Non-lab instructors, don't tune out because the technology I'm going to describe could be used in a lot of ways to make things like case studies or even readings more interactive for students. So my application is labs, but in general, this is a thing that is an interactive content delivery mechanism for students. So I want to do the acknowledgements first in case I run out of time. Dr. Marie Van Stavern is a former UCI graduate student who now teaches in Maryland, but she's the one who introduced me to this software that I'm going to talk about and gave me the idea that, hey, maybe it could be used to replace in-person labs. Dr. Renee Link in the chemistry department is also using this software for her large organic chemistry classes. Nick and Maddie are the two TAs that initially helped me out with developing these virtual exercises. And then I have to thank Fanny for her help with just the Canvas design over last summer. She made the whole course easier and better to deal with. So thank you, Fanny. All right. These labs that I designed to replace in-person experiments, these are for an upper division instrumental chemistry class. And so the way that I decided to structure them is as a choose your own adventure game. So if you're of a certain age and a certain degree of nerdiness, you may remember a couple of things, which are the choose your own adventure books and also text-based computer games, like on a 5¼ inch floppy disk. And the way that these labs are structured combines those two things. So the goals of these labs, of replacing the in-person labs, were, first of all, I wanted to make something that's more interactive than watching a video. When I taught general chemistry lab, that's what we did. We filmed the TAs doing the experiment, the students watched it and then wrote it. And when you have several hundred students, that's probably the most reasonable thing to try, but I wanted to see if I could make the students interact with the material more and understand better how the data were collected and what sort of instruments were used, what sort of instrument settings were used, so that they would have a more sophisticated understanding than is required by general chemistry students. I wanted to replicate the decision-making and student-to-student discussion that happens during a lab. So typically when I'm in the lab, students, a lot of the lab, they'll be on autopilot, they'll know how to do everything. And then they'll reach a point where they need to make a big decision, what settings to use on an instrument or what concentration of a solution to make. And then they talk about it and maybe they'll call a TA over and they're learning something at that point. And so I wanted to replicate that learning as much as I possibly could. And then finally, I wanted to keep them engaged and interested in the labs, again, more so than they would if they were just watching a half-hour-long video. And then keep them meeting the course learning objectives. So understanding how instruments work and how to use them to accomplish a specific task, how to develop a method for solving a given problem. And watching a video does not engage their brain in that way. So I needed something more interactive. So this technology, this website, or really it's a programming language that I'm talking about, is called Twine. And so this is an open source tool. So there's a lot of documentation and support on it for creating web pages and that tell interactive stories. So this is the text-based adventure game part of it. These interactive stories are designed to be non-linear and let users choose their own path. So this is where the choose your own adventure game comes in. And typically, like if you go online and look at the examples, these are people making, Dungeons and Dragons type adventure stories. There is not a lot of chemistry content on there, but we have created a bunch. And the choose your own adventure part corresponds to the multiple paths that students might take through an experiment. These HTML pages that you produce with this software can be embedded directly into Canvas, and I'll show you how that works in a minute, so that we don't have to host it on an external site. We don't have worries about students in other countries not being able to access it. All right. And then since you can embed links in the HTML page, we can give students their data using Google Sheets, and we can make sure that only UCI students have access to it, or that students only get the data that corresponds to their decisions, this kind of thing. So the Twine programming environment is a very visual environment on one level. It's organized into these boxes that you see here, which are called passages, and then each passage has an entry point and an exit point that the students can take. So for example, this one here, the students they just read something in a box here, and then there's only one way to get to difference amplifier 2. But then they need to make a decision, and that decision can take them down one of 3 paths. They're allowed to realize I made the wrong decision and go back. And then whichever one of those 3 decisions they make, we give them a data set, and then they go and they watch a video, and the video is the same for everybody. The code has elements that are really easy to work with. So for example, you can just type in text and it'll show up in the HTML page. You can also put in this case, this is an iframe holding a YouTube video. So this is just, you go to YouTube, you copy the embed code and you paste it in here. And then you can use logic as well. So we set a variable that's based on the decisions students made about what kind of amplifier they wanted to build. And then if they choose this one, they get this video. If they choose this one, they get this video, etc. So if you are familiar with programming, there's a lot you can do with Twine, but you need absolutely no programming experience to get started with it and to create an actual story. There are also on the webpage, on Twine's webpage, there's an extensive wiki and tutorials and videos and everything. Since it's open source, a lot of people contribute to this. So what it looks like for students, you can have pages that are entirely text with links that they choose. You can have pages with videos embedded in them and with text. And then you can have pages that branch them out. So click here to go back, click here to go back to a different place, click here to continue. We can also give students, as I mentioned, their experimental data. So the link here will be different depending on the student's choices. And so we set up Google Drive folders and we make a bunch of data sets. I tried to really replicate the in-lab experience so students can go way down a wrong path and get data that is just terrible. And that's not necessary though, right? So when we go back to in-person learning, I'm still planning to use these for pre-lab experiments, or pre-lab rather, like exercises. And so in that case, it'll be much more linear, maybe only 1 or 2 paths. And so in that case, you could simulate 2 data sets or collect 2 data sets and give them to the students. It doesn't have to be, this folder has 40 different options in it. It doesn't have to be that complicated. So let's see how it looks in Canvas. I have one that's already going. So here, this is how it looks in Canvas. Actually, and I'm going to put a link to these slides in the chat. And these are public slides, and the Canvas page is public as well. So if anybody wants to come and try this thing, try it. But so the students, they'll watch a video and they'll say, okay, we'll click here to build our first circuit. They'll get a circuit diagram. Here's the circuit that you're going to build. They can choose the parameters that they want to use to build that circuit and say, okay, and then they'll get a video of that circuit being constructed. They'll choose voltages to test it with, and then they'll say, okay, here's my data. And if they click here, they'll go to a Google Sheet. And then they continue. Now this page is called a sanity check, right? So they need to analyze that data before they continue and see if it's any good or not, just like they would in the regular lab. We have a 7-hour lab period in Chem 152, and you could finish in 2 hours, but you might go home and analyze your data and it's all garbage. Well, same deal here. This Twine will take about an hour to click through. You could do it in 5 minutes and get data, but some of it might be garbage. So it was important to me to replicate that part of the lab experience that they need to check as they go. And so, et cetera. Okay, so then, data collection using Google Sheets, so we can get information about the choices that the students make as they move through as well. So this is an example of what we get. So we get the time and the date that we do it. We get the students' names, which I removed. And then we get information about which choices they made as they move through. So we can ask them to do a calculation and enter their answer, and then we can grade that or not. I don't grade them right now, but when I switch to using them for pre-labs, I probably will. And they get a bunch of, anyway, we can get a bunch of data. So I'm out of time, I think, but the student response has been pretty positive. So these are survey questions from winter 21. Basically blue is good and orange is bad. And so we just asked these Likert scale questions about, did the twine help you understand procedures? Did it help you prepare for an in-person experiment? Did it help with having your group and your Zoom breakout room talk to each other? And for the most part, they said yes. So I'm very positive on this. I'm going to keep using it as we transition back to in-person even. Somebody in the chat said it must have taken an amazing amount of work to set this up. The first one, yes, but I have 7 experiments that I do on Twine. And at this point, I can make one of these in a day, including simulating all the data, making videos, etc. So there is a learning curve, but once you get past that steep part of the learning curve, these actually don't take all that much effort to set up.